The Tennis Gambling Podcast on the Sports Gambling Podcast Network is brought to you by Hamburg Fantasy. Go into 300 times your entry with their pick ace. On the promo code SGPN. Go to a special pick and first time deposit offer up to $2 bonus cash on Hamburg Fantasy promo code SGPN. We're also brought to you by Rhythm. Build your own betting model using their AI betting engine. Claim your 7-day free trial today by going to sportsgamblingpods.com. So it's Rhythm, sportsgamblingpods.com/RITHMM. And welcome, everybody, to the Tennis Gambling Podcast here on the Sports Gambling Podcast Network. It is currently early Monday morning, roughly midnight Eastern Time on July 15th. I'm your host, as always, Scott Reichel, once again going solo for this pod. We have a very, very jam-packed episode. Usually for a pretty decently long episode, we have 2 or sometimes even 3 ATP events. This time we have 4. So we kind of are in uncharted territory here. We have Bastad, Gstaad, Hamburg, and a Newport. And we're going to preview all 4 of these tournaments in a second. Just to be clear, by the way, the Hamburg event is a 500. The other 3 events are 250s. So we're going to preview all 4 of those in a second. The order of tournaments for this episode will be Gstaad, Hamburg, Bastad, and Newport. That was determined by the start time of the matches on Monday. So that's going to be the order that we do the tournaments in. Now, before we get into any of the actual recap of the Wimbledon final for the last episode, do want to quickly remind you once again to like, subscribe on YouTube. Also, reminder, don't forget to rate the podcast on Spotify or Apple. Did notice that the subscribers went up pretty handily during Wimbledon, so hopefully all of you enjoyed the last couple episodes, and hopefully all of you ended up cashing, because we've had a good lock run, and hopefully that carries over into the post-Wimbledon week or so. But either way, point is, don't forget you can show support on YouTube or on Apple or Spotify by rating and reviewing, or by liking and subscribing. Also, a reminder that we're on the live stream, so if you do want to hop in and ask some questions or just say hi, you can do so, as we do have the live stream. And also a reminder, don't forget to check out the SGPN merch store, because we have a lot of great Tennis Gambling Podcast merch. We have shirts, sweatshirts, and mugs. So we do have a lot of merchandise that you can choose from, not just for our show as well, but for the other shows with the network, because we do have some featured shows. And the Sports Gambling Podcast, the main show on the network, is the featured show for the week, because they are getting ready for college football season with their college previews and their college conference previews. And also, don't forget to tune in wherever you do get your podcast or on the SGPN app. So for starters, we are going to recap the Wimbledon final that happened on Sunday between Alcaraz and Djokovic, recapping the lock and dog pick. So overall, decent episode for us. Unfortunately, the sweep did end, but we doubled down on one play that I liked the most, and that play won. And unfortunately, another leg of the dog ended up losing. But for the lock, we had Alcaraz money line at minus 143. I felt very comfortable about Alcaraz winning. I was pretty confident that Djokovic was here because he had a very easy path. And that Alcaraz, despite dropping some sets against good competition to the likes of Medvedev, for example, Humbert and Tiafoe, etc., and Paul, I just thought that he was in better form with the eye test, and Alcaraz killed him. Alcaraz won in straight sets, as he really was never threatened at all. The main point that was a little bit nerve-wracking for Alcaraz was him blowing 3 match points while serving for the match. He ended up choking it away. Djokovic got the break, but Alcaraz held his nerve, ended up winning pretty comfortably in the tie break. So overall, Alcaraz was our main play, and that's why we doubled down on it. As the dog, we had Alcaraz to win, but we did have both players to win a set at plus 140. That didn't get there, as you ended up seeing Djokovic lose in straight sets. So overall, to recap the final, very, very underwhelming, because the first 2 sets were extremely one-sided, as Alcaraz did win the first 2 sets 6-2, 6-2. Djokovic had 0 breaks until that 40-love game with Alcaraz serving for the match. So Djokovic did not break for about the first 2 hours, give or take, and it just felt like Alcaraz was dominating play. It wasn't a fluky 6-2, 6-2, where it just seemed like Djokovic was, having a bunch of deuces, not converting break points, and things kind of got away from him. He got destroyed for about the first 2 hours. That's kind of all I have to say about that matchup. But Alcaraz now won his second Wimbledon title, his second straight Wimbledon title, and Djokovic ended up getting his ass kicked, which was extremely surprising to some. I'm surprised because we took him to win at least 1 set, but I did expect Alcaraz to win in 4 based on my original projection, and he won in 3. But the way that he dismantled Djokovic was extremely alarming, and I think we all know that Alcaraz now is the, I'd say, head honcho on tour, and Djokovic is 37. I'm not going to roast him too hard for losing Alcaraz, but I do think you can suggest it is a changing of the guard type of situation. We know that Djokovic ended up winning in Cincinnati in that 3-set marathon that was one of the greatest matches of all time. And ever since that point, Alcaraz has kind of been, well, I'll put it this way. After the ATP final loss, ATP finals loss to Djokovic in straight sets, Alcaraz has looked very comfortable against Djokovic, and I do think that he is, I don't want to say looking past Djokovic now, but I feel like Djokovic is in danger of being left in the rearview mirror, and it seems like Alcaraz is now the main guy on tour, and the way that he beat Djokovic, who, a reminder, had not lost in Wimbledon in about 6 years prior to last year, and Alcaraz beat him back-to-back. It tells you that Alcaraz is a serious problem for Djokovic, and we'll see if Djokovic can potentially solve the Alcaraz puzzle. I'm skeptical, but I thought Alcaraz would win comfortably, or at least I thought he'd win. I was very confident about that aspect, and that was right. So Alcaraz ended up getting the job done for the lock. As for the dog, he won two-handedly, and Djokovic just got destroyed. So nothing else to really add there. I do want to give a quick shout-out, though, to the men's doubles match that was the final on Saturday, which was a phenomenal doubles match. So I wanted to give some shout-outs to everyone involved. Thompson and his partner Purcell ended up losing in that one to Heliovara and Patton. No breaks in the match, crazy overall doubles match, and you saw Patton and company get the job done there. So props to those two. That was definitely the either best title match of the event or the second best compared to the women's final between Krajikova and Paolini. But I wanted to give a shout out to those guys because that doubles match was incredible, and it was as hyped as everyone hoped the Alcaraz match would be, but unfortunately the Alcaraz match was extremely one-sided. So nothing else really add there. Pretty good end of Wimbledon for us. Also want to mention we did have Alcaraz to win the event at plus 240 to cash the outright as well. So overall good episode. Cashed the outright with Alcaraz, cashed the lock, and unfortunately did lose the dog, but hopefully you loaded up more on the lock over the dog. Anyway, time to get into the actual preview of the events. A reminder, we have 4 of them, so strap in. We are going to do a lock and dog segment at the end. 1 lock, 1 dog. I didn't do 1 per event, or I didn't do extras. I just stuck with the formula. But I am going to tell you right now, we have quarter odds for Gstaad and for Hamburg. Unfortunately, no quarter odds for the final 2 tournaments in Bastad and Newport. So keep that in mind. For Gstaad, though, to mention the recent winners, Katchen actually won last year, which is a bit of a shock because he has completely fallen off a cliff ever since winning that title. Beat Ramos Vinolas in a pretty shocking final. That now that you look back on it, that was the matchup we got in 2023. Ruud ended up beating Berrettini. You ended up seeing Ruud beat Gaston. Ruud is not here for this year's event, but he did win 2 of the last 3. Not a surprise. He's the Clay 250 merchant, and he ended up winning 2 in this one. You ended up seeing Team win this in 2015. He will be in this event. Fognini won in 2017. He'll be here too. And Berrettini did win in 2018, in addition to losing in the final to Ruud a couple years ago, and he will be in the event as well. Now, for this event, once again, we do have quarter odds. So we are going to break down the quarters for this event. Starting off with the first quarter, you have Tsitsipas as the main guy. I'm going to read off the quarter odds, then I'll do the actual outright odds. So Tsitsipas is minus 200. You have Medjedovic at around plus 650. You have Thiem at 8-1, Fognini at 850, Varius at 10-1. You have Droget at 18-1, and Husler at 20-1. Now, I'm sure most people are going to take Tsitsipas because he is the hefty favorite to win the event. We know he won a Clay 1000 title earlier this year in Monte Carlo, but the issue I have with Tsitsipas is pretty simple. I can't trust him, and I feel like nobody else can. So with that being the case, I really don't want to lay 200 with Tsitsipas and not having a clay match in between. He's going straight from grass to clay. Sometimes the transition can take a match or two, and we know Tsitsipas can struggle when it comes to returning serve. With that being the case, I do think Tsitsipas at minus 200 is definitely not something I'm seriously considering. So to surprise some of you, I might actually go against Tsitsipas in the first quarter, and there are a couple options that I'm considering. First option will be Medjedovic at 650. I like his game in general. I know that he is a player that is a little bit, I'd say, volatile at times because he does have a bit of a short fuse when it comes to his temper, and that can result in him quickly unraveling in some tough spots. But the one example I think was the Leheshka match, where he looked pretty good for the first set, had a set point, didn't convert, got broken at the end, and then got buried in the second set. I forgot what event that was, but you get my point. Things can unravel quickly for Medjedovic, but I do like his talent. He has a good serve, and Tsitsipas is really not showing great signs of being a solid returner. this year. So I do think Medvedev, if he's able to face off against Tsitsipas, can hold serve somewhat regularly and make the match interesting. So give me 650 with this one. And based on Wimbledon, actually, I thought one of the most pleasant surprises was Fognini. I thought he looked great. Now, I know that he ended up losing in 5 to Agut. There were some weather delays involved and some darkness delays, so not exactly I'd say, match with a lot of flow to it. Wasn't really featuring much fluidity, but I did think that Fognini looked good in the event, beating Ruud, making a deep run, and I do think that he is in pretty good form. We know Fognini is definitely a clay favoritist. We'll use that word because I think clay is his best surface by far. But he has shown, once again, some talent on hard court and grass over the years. But 850, I think, is actually a pretty good price. You're looking at his overall draw in this event, and I think it's actually not that bad. So to go through the draw, for Fognini, he does face off against Drogot in the first round, and he is a favorite in that matchup. But he's on the other side as Tsitsipas and Medvedev and Hutzler. But you're looking at Thiem and Varius. Both guys this season have really been fadeable. I know Varius is a podcast favorite after what happened last year in the French Open against Hurkacz, but he's really been bad in 2024. Thiem's about to retire. He's been terrible for a couple years now. So I do think that Fognini does have a good draw, and I think he would actually be favored against Varius or Thiem. So with that being the case, give me Fognini at 850. I'm not sure if he'd beat Tsitsipas, but he's good on clay. And I do think if he does play his best match, we saw him give Alcaraz a serious problem on clay about a year or two ago. So I do know that his A game can still give elite players problems. Tsitsipas can unravel at any time, and he can easily have an off match and lose to anybody. So give me Fognini at 850. But simply put, I'm not taking Tsitsipas at minus 200. That's a crazy price for me to back Tsitsipas at to win the quarter, so I'm not going to bother. Give me 2 long shots, and hopefully Tsitsipas ends up imploding like he has for most of the year. Moving on to the second quarter. For this one, it should be a pretty fun one. Full disclosure, though, it's kind of a 2-horse race. For this one, you have Berrettini at about 140. You have Felix at around 160. You have Hanfman at 6-1. Galan at 10-1. Katchen, defending champion, at 14-1. Capriva at 16-1. And De Zoomer, who is somehow still playing. I thought he might have retired by now, but he is still in this event, and he's at 16-1. I'm not going to spend too much time on it. Give me the favorites here. I am going to go Berrettini, the former champion and a runner-up a couple years ago. He looked good in Wimbledon. I'm not going to blame him for losing in 4 sets to center. I feel like he put together a good effort. I know that was on grass, but I do like Berrettini's form. Very solid clay player. Did win a clay title earlier this year. So I do think that he is definitely equipped to handle this quarter. I am going to go with Felix. I know Felix can be a head case, but the draw I think is pretty weak. And I do think Berrettini or Felix are going to win this quarter. If I had to pick one over the other, I'm picking Berrettini. But I do think that Berrettini and Felix, one of them, in my opinion, will win the quarter. I don't trust Hanfman enough. I don't really trust anybody in this quarter enough. So that being the case, I am going to go with Berrettini and Felix. Katchen is a defending champion. I don't think he's that good, to be honest, and I think that he's been really bad in 2024. He's one of those random guys. I don't want to say like a Van Rithoven, but you have a couple of random guys who just win ATP events, and you kind of wonder how that happened. That's how I feel about Katchen winning this last year. He's a fine clay player, I guess, but he's really in a bad run. And based on his overall career, I think most people were shocked that he won a title before Echeverry did, for example. So for me, I am going to go with the 2 favorites. Nothing else to talk about in this quarter. Moving on to the third quarter, you have a pretty interesting one because it's kind of a similar story to the last quarter because you have 2 favorites and then a pretty decent gap between the others. You have Echeverry, speaking of him, at plus 162, and Struff at plus 162 as well. You have Dzanschulp at 550. You have Reddy at 8-1. You have Stricker at 11-1. Barrere at 12-1. And Ramos Vinolas defending runner-up at 18-1. So I think Ramos Vinolas is washed at this stage in his career, so I'm not going to pick him. I just think he does not have much left in the tank. He might win a couple rounds, but if he starts having to play matches on consecutive days, I don't trust his recovery. I don't trust his overall stamina. So I'm going to stay away from him despite being 18-1. Now, Echeverry and Struff I do like. Echeverry I do think is a very solid clay player. He almost won his first ever clay title earlier this year, but lost to Perricard in a final set breaker. And that was kind of a heartbreak for him, but he's still a solid clay player, and he looked decent over the last couple of months. So that being the case, I am going to go with him at 162. I am going to go with Struff as well. I do think he's a solid player. I know that he did win a clay title, his first ever title this year in Munich. So that's another guy, for example. You ended up seeing Katchen win an ATP title before Struff. Something that just sounds kind of very random and unlikely, but that's what happened. But Struff ended up winning on clay earlier this year, so he has a great serve. We know that can definitely translate well to the event. I do want to point out, though, I'll do it for the actual outright, so I'm going to save it, but historically speaking, you need a lot of rally tolerance here, which does give me a bit of concern with Struff, but I think that his overall firepower is a pretty dangerous skill set for this actual quarter, which is pretty weak. Give me the two favorites once again in the third quarter. For the fourth quarter, this should be a fun one. You have Humbert, fresh off his loss in Wimbledon to Alcaraz at plus 105. You have Wawrinka at 450, Gasquet at 550, Halles at 750, Klein at 850, Napolitano at 10-1, and Heidi at 16-1. Now, for this one, I am going to go with Humbert. I do like how he played in Wimbledon. I know it's a different surface. I think Humbert is still a pretty solid clay player, and I like his overall skill set. He had a great start to the year on hard court. Then he kind of dipped a bit in the middle of clay. Still had a decent run. I think it was in Monte Carlo. Ended up losing a marathon match to, I think, Ruud in 3. A point is, though, he looks pretty good on clay, and I do think he's a pretty solid clay player in general. But I do think that he was a guy who was in good form earlier this year. Then his level kind of fell off a cliff. But I think Wimbledon got him back on track, and I do think his upside definitely has him as a worthy favorite in this quarter. And it's plus 105, which I do like. The quarter's very weak, though. Post-prime Wawrinka is the second favorite, and post-prime Gasquet is the third favorite. Like, sure, give me Humbert at plus 105. But I am actually going to go with another Frenchman that I like in this quarter, a guy that actually went through qualifying and a guy that's actually facing off against Gasquet in the first round. I like Halles at 750. I think Halles is a pretty solid price. Now, with a lot of players making the jump from Wimbledon, grass to clay, it is good to have a couple matches under your belt, and qualifying does come in handy with that case because Halles had to face off against a couple of guys on these courts, and he ended up coming through. But Halles is a pretty good clay player. I know he made a clay final last year, which I think he lost to Ruud, I think. Point is, though, he's a pretty good clay player. He looked good in Wimbledon, so I think that he's in line for a good showing. He did lose in Wimbledon to Rune in 5, but I do think that he's kind of regained his form, similar to what I said about Humbert. Of course, Humbert's got more upside, but I'm picking a guy at a plus 750 price, fading 2 past prime guys in Gasquet and Wawrinka, and I do think that Halles, if he truly regained his form, can make a somewhat respectable run here, which makes this a value play at 750. But if he can end up beating Gasquet, then he has Wawrinka and Klein up next, so he'd face off against Humbert in the quarters, which I do like the overall draw of. So give me Humbert at 105 and give me Halles at 750. Moving on, though, to the outright picks for the overall event. So a reminder, we're going to read off the outright odds now, as we just went through the quarters. For the outright, you have Tsitsipas at plus 175. You have Berrettini at 6-1. You have Struff at 750. A reminder, shop around. You can find better lines. Humbert is also at 750. Echeverry is at 750. Felix is 8-1. Desanchelp's 25-1. Medjedovic 25-1. Wawrinka 28-1. Hanfman 28-1. Team at 40-1. Gasquet 40-1. Fognini 40-1. Varius at 50-1. Halles at 50-1, Stricker 50-1, you get the point. Those odds, by the way, are courtesy of Bet365. So shop around if you are going to consider betting on anybody, and you can definitely go find better prices in different books or on different books. Now, I did that for you if you do want to go with the players that I backed, because I did shop around and I picked the best lines available. For my outright picks, though, I said before, I'm not picking Tsitsipas. I don't see any value. Plus 175 for a head case. I'm good. I'll go elsewhere. So going with the other options, I'm going to go with Berrettini at 6-1. I mentioned before I like his overall quarter. I think that he would end up beating Felix in a match if they face off against each other. He's won a clay title earlier this year. He looked healthy and solid on grass, giving Sinner a serious run. Did not beat him. He lost in 4, but still a good showing nonetheless. And I do like the fact that he's a defending, I should say he's a former champion, and he is a former runner-up. So I do like his overall history in this event. Give me Berrettini at 6-1. I am going to go Humbert at 750. Simply put, a very weak quarter. You're looking at him being on the opposite side of Tsitsipas and Berrettini, but he has Wawrinka and Gasquet and Halles as immediate competition. It's a pretty favorable draw for him, let's put it that way, in the quarter. So I am going to go with Humbert for a value play at 750. I'm going to go with Echeverry at 8-1. I know he's still never won a title on the ATP level, but he's still a very solid clay player. And to go back to what I was saying before, which I ended up deciding to wait until now to discuss, looking at the recent winners, with the exception of Berrettini, who won in 2018, a lot of very solid rally guys. Kachin won. Ramos Vinolas made a deep run. Ruud won. We know Ruud has a pretty underrated serve, but he's still a solid rally guy. Gaston made a final. Team won in 2015, but he was a phenomenal elite clay player. The point is, though, if Kachin, Ramos Vinolas, and Gaston are going to make final runs in this event, then I do think that rally tolerance and overall consistency is definitely a recipe for success on this overall tournament. Or in this tournament. So I am going to go with a couple of players that I do think might not possess the best serve, but do possess a lot of overall rally tolerance and a lot of consistency, and Etcheverry does check that box. That's why I am going to lean to Struff as well to win the quarter, but I'm picking Etcheverry over Struff in a potential long shot run, or I should say a decently priced run to win the title. I don't see Struff winning here. I think that Struff might make the semis, but I'm not picking him to go beyond that. Etcheverry, I think, can. If Kachin or Ramos Vinolas can make a final here last year, then Etcheverry can win the title. So I'm going to go with him at 8-1, and I am going to go with a long shot. It might be a donation, but I did see a lot of 28-1 prices on him. I mentioned before, Bet365 did have 40-1. Give me Fognini. Let's have some fun with it. Fognini made a respectable run last year on hard court, where he ended up making it to either the semis or the final. I think it was the semis. Point is, though, he had a deep run in an event, and we saw him in Wimbledon look pretty good. But he's a solid clay player in general. He always has been. And once again, I mentioned before that rally tolerance is important. Fognini does have a lot of skill, a lot of touch with the drop shots, very solid overall backhand and forehand potential. I know that the unforced errors can be an issue for him at times, but 40-1, I actually like quite a bit for a pretty decent draw, assuming that you actually want to fade Tsitsipas with me. Give me Fognini at 40-1 as my long shot. Moving on to the next tournament, we're going to talk about Hamburg, which is the only 500 event of the week. So moving on into the actual odds here. Once again, we do have quarters here, so we are going to talk about quarters. Then we'll move into the outrights to win the entire event. Starting off with the recent winners, though. Zverev's defending champion in his home country as he beat De Gere in the final. Musetti beat Alcaraz at a fun match there 2 years ago. You had Carreño Busta beating Krajinovic, two guys who battled injuries for the last couple of years. That was it's kind of a shame because both guys were solid on clay and they both got injured a bunch. And Rublev did beat Tsitsipas in the final a couple years ago. So the point is, for this actual tournament, it's a 500, so you tend to get a lot of star power in it compared to the other 250s, which is why Zverev's here again. It's why Rune's here. It's why Rublev's here again. Baez, for example. There's a lot of solid clay players, a lot of players you'd expect to be in a clay 500. So the draw here is definitely going to be harder than the draws in the 250s. Now, for the actual, I'd say first quarter, looking at the odds here, this is the Zverev quarter. He's minus 150. Zhang 6-1. Diaz Acosta 650. Caboli's 10-1. Seaboth Wild's 12-1. Gaston is 12-1. Altmaier's 12-1. And De Jong is 33-1. Now, it's actually a tough quarter, I'll admit it, for a guy that is the clear favorite defending champion. Not the easiest quarter in the world. Now, I think Zverev's going to get by because he's defending champion, and we saw him lose in the French Open final to Alcaraz in 5. He's clearly the best clay player here. Like, I'm not going to make an argument against it. I do know that there are other players with talent on clay. Rune, for example, Baez, but Zverev is definitely the best clay player here. So I am going to go with Zverev to win the quarter. I'm not picking anybody else. He's got the home country behind him, defending champion. It is a tough quarter, though, because Zhang's underrated on clay. Diaz Acosta won a clay title this year. Caboli can be dangerous. Seaboth Wild can be dangerous. I get it. But Zverev's the best player here. That's kind of going to be all she wrote for that quarter. Moving on. So once again, Zverev minus 150 is my quarter pick. All of these odds are from Bet365. Moving on to the second quarter. This one should be fun. For the second quarter, you have Cerundolo at 140. He's been kind of a mess for the last couple of months. You have Arnaldi at plus 275. You have Papiron at 5-1, fresh off the 4-set loss to Djokovic in Wimbledon. You have Mortero at 8-1. You have Martinez at 10-1, who did make a clay final earlier this year before losing to Hurkacz, but he has been in bad form over the last couple of months. You have Squire at 12-1, Kwan at 14-1, and Blanchett at 33-1. To be honest, I'm kind of surprised Kwan's here. I thought Kwan was going to be more of the hardcore clay swing guy, unless he's going to be representing Korea in the Olympics and he wants some clay practice. That could be a reason for it. It's also a 500, so I guess you get prize money out of it. But I'm not picking Kwan to actually make a deep run at all in this matchup or in this overall event. Now, Cerundolo I'm skipping. I can't trust him. He's been a head case all year, and I really don't think plus 140 in a pretty deep quarter is worth it at all. So I am going to skip Cerundolo at 140. I don't see much value on that at all. Now, for the actual quarter, I am going to go Arnaldi at plus 275. There's going to be a bunch of marathons in this. Like, I'm not picking Arnaldi to cruise through everyone. Seems like he is definitely a 3-set magnet. So you might end up having to sweat out a couple of rounds with Arnaldi. But 275 is a good price for a player that's objectively good on a bunch of surfaces. I think that he's a very talented young player. The serve can be a bit iffy at times, but it's on clay, which definitely is going to do him some favors. I think that he's still a very talented player, and I think his draw is actually not that bad. Martinez in the first round sounds difficult on paper, but he's actually a decent-sized favorite because Martinez has been that bad over the last couple months. But then he has Papyrin in the second round. He's on the opposite side of Cerundolo. So once again, you can potentially have a wild card or a potential. I forgot what PR stands for. I'm drawing a blank. The point is he had an exemption. He got accepted. Quan did. So the point is, if Arnaldi gets by Martinez and probably Papyrin, it's a pretty easy overall matchup, most likely, unless Cerundolo ends up regaining his form, to actually make it to the semis. So with that being the case, I do think, where's that personal request, I think, is what PR stands for. Point is, though, I think you're looking at a spot where I think Arnaldi has value, and I think 275 is a good price. Now, the other guy I'm going to take is also in the bottom of that quarter. I'm going to go with Papyrin at 5-1. I know he ended up winning a clay title in Umag about a year or two ago, and I think that he's a solid player. He can be streaky at times, but he looked fine in the Wimbledon as he ended up beating Echeverry in 5 and ended up losing in 4 to Djokovic. But I think 5-1 is a good price for a guy that does have a clay title on the ATP Tour in his lifetime. So I am going to go with that as my, or I should say, I'll go with those two as my 2 picks. Sorry, it's protected ranking. That's what it means. So the point is, Quan got injured and he had a ranking, so he ended up reserving a spot here. So apologies. Should have probably known that, but it does mean a protected ranking. So he got in because he had a higher ranking and he got injured previously. Anyway, point is, I'm not going to pick Quan. I don't think he's a good clay player. Cerundolo, I think, is the best clay player here when he's on. He's been terrible the entire season. I'm not backing him at plus 140. So for value, give me Arnaldi at 275 and give me Papyrin at 5-1. Moving on to the third quarter. This should be a fun one as well. This is going to be the Baez quarter. For this one, you have Baez as the favorite at plus 240. You have Darderi at 333. Shevchenko at 6-1, who I'm easily skipping. He's not a good clay player at all. You have Sonego at 650. You have Lajovic at 7-1. You have Kepfer at 7-1. Molliker at 10-1, and you have Alves at 12-1. Now, Baez did win a 500 earlier this year. He's definitely the best clay player in this quarter by, in my opinion, a decent margin. I am going to go with him. I know that Kepfer in the first round might not be the easiest matchup, but I do think that 240 is still a good price for a guy that's a well-known, well-decorated, and very successful clay ATP player. He has a bunch of clay titles already on the ATP Tour, and I think that he's in line to maybe make a deep run here in another 500. But give me Baez at 240 at what I think is a pretty good overall price. And for the other option, I am going to go with Darderi. Did end up winning a clay title earlier this year as well. Now, he's very young. It's his first official year on the ATP Tour. But I think 333 is a good price for a guy that I think can be dangerous on clay, and we saw that. But you're looking at his overall path. Sonego has been a mess all year. Also, not exactly a great clay player. I think Sonego is better on grass and on hardcore, personally. You're looking at Shevchenko or Molliker. I mean, Shevchenko's horrible on clay, and Molliker's not very good anyway. So I do think that he is the wild card because he's German. He's not very good. So I think that you're looking at Darderi having a pretty easy path to the quarters, which is why I am going to take him. Lajovic can be interesting, but I think that he would lose to Baez. He can be dangerous, though, in any given clay event. But give me the easy draw for Darderi and give me Baez at 240 as the clear best clay player in this quarter. Moving on to the fourth quarter, you have Rune as the favorite here, as the pretty hefty favorite, as about plus 125. Looking at the other options, though, there is a gap between him and the others. So for the other members of the quarter, you have Fees at 450, you have Bergs at 650, you have Munar at 8-1, De Gier at 8-1, you have Offner at 10-1, Morozin at 11-1, and Trungaliti at 18-1. Now, for this one, I am going to go with Rune at 125. I know he's a bit of a head case, so you can apply the Tsitsipas argument against me in this case and say Rune is too unpredictable. I can't back him at 125. I understand where you're coming from. I'm not going to argue with you, but Rune definitely has the talent to dominate this quarter, and I think his path's overall pretty easy, so I'm going to go with him. However, I am going to add somebody else to it. I am going to add Fees at 450. I know he's been very up and down this season, mostly down. He was good in Wimbledon, though. Ended up losing to de Minaur in a pretty respectable run there. But I think Fees might have regained some confidence in that overall event, and even though it is a surface change, I do like his overall talent. The issue is he was kind of in a serious downswing, and being young and immature, he was unable to climb out of the abyss. And it seems like maybe Wimbledon was exactly what he needed to regain some confidence. But we know that he has some clay talent. We saw him win a clay title. We saw him beat Ruud handily on clay last year. So the talent's definitely there. Give me Fees at 450 at what I think is a pretty good price. So once again, for the overall outrights for the quarters here. First quarter, we're going to go with Zverev by himself at 150. Second quarter, we're going to go Arnaldi at 275 and Papirin at 5-1. For the third quarter, we're going to go with Baez at 240 and Darderi at 330, or 333, I mean. And for the fourth quarter, we're going to go with Rune at 125. We're going to go with Fees at 450. Moving on to the outright event, the outright picks, I mean, for this event. So going through the actual odds here, Zverev's the favorite to repeat here at 187. You have Rune at 4-1, Cerundolo at 750, Baez at 10-1, Arnaldi 16-1, Darderi 16-1, Fees 18-1, Zhang at 22-1, Acosta Diaz Acosta 25-1, Bergs 28-1, De Gier 33-1, Kemper 33-1, Munar 33-1 if you want to go for a clay specialist. Papirin is 33-1, Shevchenko's 33-1. You kind of get the point. So to go through my picks here, I'm obviously picking Zverev. I think he's the best player, French Open finalist. I think that he, unless he once again stumbles randomly to somebody well beneath him, he should coast. So I'm going to go with Zverev at 187, which I shopped around and found as the best price. Rune, though, I am going to take as well at 450. Still a very solid clay player. I mentioned before, Bet365 did have his odds located at 4-1. I did find a 450, so give me that instead as my second choice. For the third choice and the last choice, I am going to go with Baez at 14-1. Looking at the overall recent winners, you have not gotten many, if any, Cinderella winners. You've had a couple Cinderella runs, but Zverev, for example, elite player. Musetti is a very solid clay player as well. Cinderella run because he beat Alcaraz, but still a very solid clay player. Carreño Busto was easily a top 20 guy for a couple years, and he got injured all the time, but he was still a very talented player in general, and Rublev won against Tsitsipas. So with that being the case, I'm going with relative star power here. I am going to go with kind of chalk, but Baez at 14-1, I think is a great price, especially for a guy that has won a 500 clay event earlier this year. Give me Baez at 14-1 to make it interesting. So once again, my three outright picks, give me Zverev at 187, give me Rune at 450, and give me Baez at 14-1. A couple of guys I thought about but did not pull the trigger on, Arnaldi, for example, and Papirin. I thought about both of them. However, Arnaldi, I think, just dropped so many sets and can really experience so many just dips in his level in matches, which is why he goes to so many marathons. But I think that there are a couple guys that are more reliable, and if he's facing off against Zverev in the semis, I'm taking Zverev. I just think Zverev's better on clay, so I'm not sold on Arnaldi or Papirin's chances to beat Zverev in Hamburg, in, of course, Zverev's backyard, where he has a massive crowd advantage. So I am going to go with Baez, who's on the other side of the bracket, which I do like quite a bit. Same with Rune, so you might be able to wait out a potential upset loss by Zverev, and at that point, you might have full chaos in this event. But give me the favorites and give me a Baez with them at 14-1. Now, that's going to wrap it up the first two events. Before we get into the other two, do want to take this time to remind everybody that we are brought to you by Autonomic Fantasy, because they still have their Pick 8, which is still live, and you can create entries up to 8 picks in order to go and make a double flex your entries. So it's 2 picks and still win your entry. With more picks to make, an extra always win. The excitement's higher than ever. Best part, can now win up to 325 times the original amount. You can now use specials and boost on all flex entries. I'll personally keep using Angel Reese rebounds higher in every event, in every entry that I have for the Pick 8, because it has been so effective this season. Sign up with the promo code SGPN. Go to special for getting a first time deposit offer up to $2 bonus cash on a fantasy promo code SGPN. We're also brought to you by Circus Survivor and Circa Millions. Circus Sports is back with Circus Survivor and Circa Millions, giving away $16 million in guaranteed prizes. And of course, Circa contests have no rake. Circa Millions pick 5 NFL teams ATS each week and compete for $6 million or survive. They have a gauntlet to claim the $10 million prize. Sign up in person at Circus Sports between now and September 7th and use a proxy to play from anywhere. We even have a deal with footballcontestproxy.com to save you $50 with the promo code SGP. Don't have a trip booked yet for Las Vegas before football. Ultimate Contest Weekend is a great time to go and hang out with Ryan and Sean and enjoy some of the open bar events, the world's best sports book, from August 22nd through the 24th. Welcome back, everyone, to the Tennis Gambling Podcast. Just finished previewing Gstaad and Hamburg. Time to keep it rolling as we are at the 35-minute mark and we have 2 tournaments to go. However, I mentioned it before, I'll say it again. We do not have quarter odds for these final 2 tournaments, so it should take a lot less time. Moving on to Bastad, which is going to be the next event we talk about. Should be a fun one. For recent winners, you have Rublev beating Ruud. You had Cerundolo beating Baez, and you had Ruud beating Coria. Rublev winning the second set 6-0 against Ruud was shocking in that final after a tiebreak in the first set. But Rublev was in great form, and we'll see how he looks in this event because he's been really bad and really inconsistent for the last couple of months. We saw him lose in the first round of Wimbledon to Kamansanya. We'll see how he ends up looking in this one. I think he lost to Kamansanya. I think. Let me just quickly confirm that. I think that's who he lost to. Yeah, he lost to Kamansanya in the first round of Wimbledon, so he's been in really bad form, but he's a defending champion, so I am at least going to acknowledge his presence in this event. Now, for the outrights, of course, Ruud's here because it's a 250 and it's clay, so he's got to add something to his trophy case. But Ruud is going to be the favorite in this event, so we are going to read off the outright odds first, and because there's no reason not to. We don't have any quarters. So Ruud is about 187. You have Rublev at 333. Nadal, though, is here. So if you want to bet Nadal, he's at 4-1. You have Greek Sport 11-1. A reminder, Nadal did skip Wimbledon and the grass season, so he should be rested, actually. I'm not sure how solid his durability is going to be and how his stamina is going to hold up if he plays back-to-back days. But we'll see what happens. Nadal is here, though, at 4-1, and it's nice to see him compete, trying to get himself ready on clay right before the Olympics. Now, Greek Sport is 11-1. Navone is at 16-1. Nori's 18-1. Baena is 22-1. Muller is 28-1. Kotov's 28-1. Borges 28-1. To be honest, not going to read anybody else off. I don't think anybody else has really a chance. Garin, though, has a decent clay history. Years ago, he's 40-1. And Coria is 66-1 if you want a clay specialist. Now, for the event, Ruud is the favorite, as I said before. I found 2-1. I'm going to take it. It's not that complicated. Made the final last year, won the event a couple years ago. It's a clay 250. I don't really have to say much else. This is his bread and butter, and I think that he's going to look very sharp here. Give me Ruud at 2-1 as my first pick. For the second pick, I am going to go with an immediate rematch of the final last year. I'm going Rublev at 350 because I think that the overall, I'd say, level of competition in this tournament is actually pretty weak, and I think that Rublev, if he is able to regain his form, should be able to have a solid enough draw or an easy enough draw for him to make a deep run. Now, of course, it's 350, and he's been a head case, so I can understand if you want to skip Rublev, but based on overall talent and familiarity winning the title here last year, I like his overall path. Now, he also has a very easy draw. He has a bye in the first round in either Tarante or a qualifier, then either Muller, a qualifier, Baena, or Safulin. I know Muller's been in decent form recently, but Rublev will be a massive favorite against any of those guys. And then you're looking at probably Greek Sport in the quarters. It's really not, or I should say in the semis, it's really a favorable draw for Rublev, so I am going to go with him. However, I'm not going to only go with Rublev in case he does short circuit again. Give me Greek Sport. I mentioned my face-off against Rublev in the semis. If Rublev gets upset, I think Greek Sport has the talent to make a deep run. We saw him arguably beat Zverev in the French Open as he had a massive opportunity up 2 breaks in the 5th set, and he choked it, so he ended up losing to Zverev. But Zverev made the final, and he was 1 set away from winning the whole thing, and Greek Sport had him on the ropes. I think Greek Sport is an underrated clay player. I think he's solid, and I think his draw as well is pretty favorable. He's on the other side of the bracket as Nadal. So if you're afraid of Nadal, you can let Nadal and Ruud battle it out. It's also why I'm staying away from Nadal, though. I'm picking Ruud to beat Nadal on clay in 2024. There's nothing you can really do about it. Nadal can maybe surprise me, but I doubt it personally. I think that stamina will be a concern, and Ruud, I do think, is the better clay player in 2024 than Nadal is. So give me Ruud in that hypothetical matchup. But Greek Sport has a bye, then either Daniel or Pizarro, and then either Rocha or Ugo Carabelli. It's a hell of a draw for him to give me Greek Sport at 11-1. So once again, my picks for the Bastad tournament, I am going to go Ruud at 2-1. Rublev at 350, and give me Greek Sport at 11-1. Moving on to the only grass event for the upcoming week, one of my favorite events of the year. We have Newport, which should be fun. Usually you have a long shot win it or somebody that was mispriced, and you end up getting just absolute chaos in the event. So to go through last year's winner, it was Mannarino, who ended up beating Mickelson in straight sets in the final. You had Cressy, who ended up beating Bublik the year prior. Bublik had a good chance to win it. He choked it, but that was a fun match. Anderson, who I remember we actually gave out to win the event a couple years ago against Brooksby, ended up winning that one. And you saw Isner beat Bublik in the final a couple years ago. Isner was like a 4-time champion. He dominated this actual event. I know he lost to Mickelson last year. He was also about to retire, so Mickelson had a dream run that was a pretty favorable draw in hindsight, and then he got smacked by Mannarino in the final. Now, for the actual outrights, I am going to read off the odds quickly. So I'm going to warn you right now, this is probably the most open event of the entire week based on history and based on the actual, I'd say, field. It can really go in a bunch of directions. So Nakashima is 4-1 as the favorite. Giron is 750. Mickelson's 8-1 off the runner-up finish last year. Vukic is 9-1. Eubanks is 9-1. Mannarino's 10-1 as the defending champion. Mensik 11-1. Cressy's 14-1. Rinderknech is 18-1. You have Svadja at 20-1. McDonald 20-1. Hichikata 20-1. Lestien 22-1. Mayotte is 25-1. You have Quinn at 28-1. Opelka's back in town. He's 28-1. You have Diallo 28-1. Albert at 28-1. Moshizuki at 40-1. And then you have a couple of long shots who really have no chance in hell to win this event. Benoit Paire, by the way, is 125-1. Anyway, point is, for this event, I'm expecting absolute chaos. So I do think you're looking at a lot of different people who can make a theoretical run. Now, I'm going to start off with Mannarino, because Mannarino is the defending champion. Yes, I know he's historically speaking a very good grass player. Having said that, he has been horrible for about 3-4 months. I'm good. I'm not going to pick Mannarino. I think that at the end of the day, until he proves to me that he has regained his form, I'm not going to pick him. Now, I will admit the grass conditions suit him very well, but after watching him make a mockery of the clay season, and then you figure, all right, well, that was clay. He's terrible on clay. Grass season will pick it up like it's nothing. He was horrible on grass. So Mannarino has been bad in multiple surfaces, including his favorite surface, and now he's 10-1 to repeat. He might win it again. I can't bet it. There's no reason for me to trust him based on how he's played for the last couple months. I'm going to skip it. I am going to go with other options in this tournament. So I'm going to start there. For the first option, I actually am going to go Nakashima at 5-1. I think Nakashima showed some serious talent and skill in Wimbledon. We know that he's a very talented grass player. We also know that he's got a lot of upside, but he also saw his career kind of go off the rails for the last year. I don't want to compare it to Fees, because Fees' dip wasn't as long as Nakashima's was, but I do think it's a pretty similar story where you have guys that were kind of bursting onto the scene, making meteoric rises as youngsters, and then some regression hit. And Nakashima kind of had to go back to the drawing board in challengers, and it seems like based on Wimbledon, knocking on wood, he might have figured it out. So with that being the case, I like his overall talent, and I do think that he's in line for a very good showing here. I actually like 5-1. I think that he is a solid player that can make a very deep run. His overall draw in the event as well is pretty favorable, despite not being in the, trying to find out where he exactly is located. The point is he's actually not near the 1 seed, and he's actually on pace to face off against Giron, the 2 seed, in the quarterfinals, and he's the favorite. I find it pretty telling the 5 seed in the event's favorite to win the whole thing. So Nakashima is off against Nava in the first round, then Mensik or a qualifier. Mensik looked pretty good in his last couple grass matches, but he really has no grass history, and Nakashima does have a much more, I'd say, impressive grass resume than Mensik by comparison. But the main reason why I'm going to take Nakashima is the history of the event, because I know a lot of Americans tend to show up for the event. They kind of stockpile it with Americans, but an American has made the final of this event in each of the last, just doing the math here, 1, 2, 3, 4, each of the last 6 times an American's made the final. So I think that Nakashima has a solid draw. I think he would be in line to beat Giron in a grass match because his serve's better naturally. So I think that he'd be able to hold more regularly, but I am going to go Nakashima at 5-1. However, I acknowledge how much of a head case Nakashima can be, so I am actually going to go with Giron as well at 750 because I think that Giron, even though he ended up losing early in Wimbledon, it was to Zverev. I'm not going to fully blame him for that. Zverev was in good form. Point is, though, Giron, I do think he's a solid player. I think he's underrated on grass, and I think that he can show a good effort here in this event. We saw him make an ATP final earlier this year before losing to Tommy Paul. That was on hard court, but his overall path's fine. He has a bye in either Svaja or Pair. He should win that easily. And then you're looking at Nakashima potentially, but I am going to go with both those guys because I think that the bottom half of this draw is very weak, and I want to capitalize on it. Now, to go through the other options for the actual tournament, Mickelson 8-1. I don't think Mickelson's that good, to be honest. I know he made the final last year. Watching him play, for a guy that tall, he really does not have a great serve, and I feel like that's an issue on grass, which he has to work on. So Mickelson, until he improves the serve by a couple miles per hour, I'm not going to really back him to win any event. I don't think he's good enough. So I'm going to pass on Mickelson. Vukic I actually like at 9-1, who looked pretty good in Wimbledon. He was up a break in the first set against Alcaraz. Not his fault he went up against the inevitable champion in the second round after having a competitive match in the first round against Offner. But I think for the sake of the value, I think 9-1 is actually a good price on Vukic, and I think his draw is pretty good. His serve is solid. He's got grass skills. We saw him make a deep run in a grass event a couple weeks ago, but you're looking at 9-1, which I think is a good price. And for the overall draw, it's really favorable. He has Wong in the first round, who's a relative unknown. Then you have Sparizzi, another wild card unknown, and a qualifier. So Vukic has a very easy path into the quarters. And then you're looking at Eubanks or a qualifier or Quinn. You know my thoughts on Eubanks. I think Eubanks stinks. I don't think he's very good at tennis, and I understand that on grass he's better. But if you're asking me who I'd pick to actually win a match between the two of them, I'd pick Vukic. I think Vukic actually beat Eubanks on hard court a couple years ago in the DC Open, I think. Might have been Atlanta. I'm trying to remember. I think it might have been Atlanta, actually. Point is, Vukic has beaten Eubanks before. I don't think Eubanks is very good. I think Eubanks is another ATP title winner that you look back on and go, how the hell did that guy win an ATP title? I'm not a big fan of Eubanks. It's well documented. Give me Vukic instead at 9-1. And moving on to my last choice, my last two choices, I am going to go with a long shot, a pair of long shots. I'm going to go with a pretty underrated option, the guy that did lose to Fritz in 4 sets in Wimbledon. Give me Rinderknech at 25-1. I like his draw, and I do like the odds at 25-1 that I found offshore. The path's not bad. He has Mochizuki in the first round, which I think he should win. Then Mayotte or Kovacevic, he should win that one. And then you have Mickelson, Cressy, or Albert. Once again, not really a fan of those options. Mickelson I really don't think is that great. And Cressy has a lot of grass talent as a former champion, but his double faulting is absurd, and he's mostly a challenger-level guy at this point because he really just can't break anybody, and he double faults all the time, so he has a hard time winning matches. But Rinderknech at 25-1 with a path like that into the quarters, I think is a very good price. So I'm going to go with him, and maybe he could beat Manarino if Manarino ends up stumbling because he's been in bad form. I don't mind the actual path that Rinderknech has. Now, is he a head case? A little bit. Does he have injury history? Sure. So he might fall short, but 25-1 is a good price for what should be a very open half of the bracket. And moving on to the last pick that I have for the outrights. I'm going to warn you right now, this is a pure donation. He's not going to win the event. However, I found one insane price offshore that I have to give out. Opelka, we know, is an elite server. He's a top 3 server on tour when healthy. The issue is he's never healthy. I think he's played about 1 match since 2022. So we'll see what happens. But Opelka, according to Bet365, for example, is 28-1. That's mostly consensus. He's pretty much 28-1 in every book. However, I went offshore, and I found a price on Opelka that is too good to not take. I found 80-1. So if you're going to give me 80-1 on a player that's 28-1 market wide, I'm going to blindly take you. I feel like those odds are insane. Now, I understand Opelka has a pretty interesting draw because he's facing off against Lestienne in the first round. Lestienne is a weird type of drop shot finesse player, but he's also not exactly known for any firepower. So Opelka can hit through him if he actually has his game back. And I do think Opelka, if he's actually going to be on point with the serve, let's assume best case scenario. Let's say Opelka comes back like nothing happened. He just starts serving bombs and he stays healthy. I think he'd be one of the favorites to win the event. I just think that his overall odds at 80-1 are nuts, and his odds in this matchup are actually not that bad. But Lestien, if you want to look into a bit more, he's a very finesse player, a lot of drop shots, so it might end up making Opelka very uncomfortable. But I do think that Opelka's serve, if it is on, maybe it's a big if because it's his first match in a while. If it's on, good luck trying to break him. And Lestien's only 5'11". So you might end up getting a lot of holds, a lot of aces, and Opelka aces, by the way, might be a good option for underdog if you're making an entry. But I think 80-1 when market, I'd say every market has 28-1. It's a blind play for me, and hopefully Opelka looks sharp enough to make a respectable run. So that's going to wrap it up for Newport. A reminder, my picks, Nakashima at 5-1, Giron 750, Vukic at 9-1, Rinderknech at 25-1, and Opelka at 80-1. A reminder that I usually give out like 2 or 3 outrights, but I think this event's going to be an absolute crapshoot. It always is. It's why Newport's one of my favorite events of the entire year. It's because anybody can win and expect a lot of drama and a lot of chaos. So that being the case, give me 5 outrights for this event. That's going to wrap it up, though, for the actual preview of these 4 events, Gstaad, Hamburg, Bastad, and Newport. Now it's time for the actual lock and dog picks. But for anything to that, do want to remind you once again that we are brought to you by Rhythm, because Rhythm's a great place to help you with your player props. Rhythm's the go-to sports betting tool that transports complex data into actionable insights, empowering bettors with smarter data-driven decisions. Unlike other platforms, Rhythm combines predictive analytics with an intuitive user experience, making betting both easier and more enjoyable. The predictive models were born from the brains of MIT data scientists and quants with over 3 years of data to help drive you to better AI-backed betting decisions. Rhythm also has a lot of projections that have been very solid recently for WNBA and for golf. Claim your 7-day free trial today by going to sportscampodcast.com/rhythm, sportscampodcast.com/RITHMM. Welcome back, everyone, to the Tennis Gambling Podcast. Just finished previewing all 4 events for the upcoming week. Now it's time for the lock and dog picks. Now, I know that some of the matches start very early on Monday, so I intentionally avoided those matchups. I ended up doing one play, which I think is on Tuesday. The other's on Monday, but it's in Newport, so it's going to be around noon, give or take. For the lock, though, I am going to go to the Cressy match, actually, as he is taking on a pretty underrated opponent, which is Albert, who actually gave Hurkacz a bit of a run in the first round of Wimbledon. For this one with Cressy, I think you know where I'm going with this one. Give me the over in this matchup. I found 22.5 at -144. Most books have 23.5. I don't mind it, but I'd prefer 22.5 with the juice because I do think that a 7-6, 6-4 outcome is actually pretty realistic for this matchup. Now, Cressy is a tiebreak machine. He's had at least one tiebreak in 4 straight matches. It's standard. The only time it gets broken is when he double faults 3 times in a game. But he's a great server, especially in this tournament because he did win the title here a couple years ago. Cressy is a very good server, and I think that Albert is going to struggle to return his serve, at least for most of the overall match. Because Albert, if you want to go for his height, he's only 5'9", which is a problem. Now, he did a good job against Hurkacz in the first round of Wimbledon early. Then he got buried in 4 sets. Eventually, Hurkacz found his rhythm serving, and at that point, Albert didn't touch his serve for the last couple sets. I think Cressy's good enough to actually serve and volley his way to a bunch of free points in this match, and I do think that with Albert's small frame, Cressy can definitely approach and definitely have a lot of easy putaways at the net to end points quickly. Albert likes to rally and have a lot of long points. Cressy won't let that happen. Give me Cressy to hold the lot in this matchup, or pretty often. He might not get broken. We'll see what happens. But I want to at least point out Albert, who at being 5'9" and not being a great server, you'd assume a lot of blowout sets, a lot of 6-2, 6-3s just based on the amount of breaks usually get. Not the case, actually. There has been at least one 7-5 or 7-6 set in Albert's last 10 matches. 10 straight matches with a 7-5 or a 7-6 set. So for whatever reason, Albert's involved in a bunch of long sets, and I do think with that being the case, a 7-5 or a 7-6 set is pretty likely. I think over half a breaker was -141, I think, on Bet Rivers, which I do like quite a bit, but I think you're looking at what should be a competitive match that might go 3 sets. The over 2.5 sets, by the way, is +105 or +110, which is basically nothing. They're kind of just pricing it like this is going 3, so we're just going to assume it's going 3. So I do think for the sake of that, there are a couple ways to get there. Either you get a breaker and potentially 2 very competitive sets, or it goes 3 and you automatically get there with Cressy being involved. So that being the case, give me the over 22.5 games. What I think should be a competitive match. Might go 3, but I'll play it safe. Give me the over at 22.5 games at minus 144 as my lock instead. For the dog, I am going to go to Hamburg in a matchup featuring a German. It's going to be Altmaier taking on Caboli. That matchup sounds very, very unpredictable. Just actually reading it off, and I agree with that overall vibe. I am going to go with the over 2.5 sets, or in other words, the both players who win a set market at plus 135 on Caesars. Now, Caboli is one of my, I don't want to say favorite players, but I'll say it this way. He's one of my rising stars or players to keep an eye on. I mentioned him a couple months ago. He's been very good to us on the pod. I'm not sure he's lost a bet for us all year. He's been great ever since we backed him earlier this year. For this one, I see a war because Caboli, despite being a player that I like, he has dropped a lot of sets recently. He has dropped at least one set in 9 of his last 10 matches. Some of it was on grass, some of it was on clay, but he does seem to find himself in marathons, and I do think that his overall game, similarly to Arnaldi, a fellow Italian, has all the talent in the world, but his level dips constantly, and the overall, I'd say, inconsistency results in a bunch of marathon matches. So give me the, I'd say, expectation that Altmaier wins at least one set in front of the home country fans in this event. Now, as for Altmaier, he's also dropped a bunch of sets, as he's dropped at least one set in 7 straight. So I do think Altmaier is in line to struggle as well to maintain his consistency. As a result, I see a circus in this matchup, and they also faced off one time in their careers. It was dated about 3 years ago. Faced off on clay, the only head-to-head meeting they have, back in 2021, and Altmaier won that match in 3 sets. So the head-to-head is 1-0 to this prop. Caboli, though, drops sets all the time. So does Altmaier, and as a result, I am going to go with the over 2.5 sets at plus 135 as my dog. So once again, the picks for the show, the lock's going to be on Albert and Cressy over 22.5 games at minus 144, and the dog will be on Altmaier and Caboli over 2.5 sets at plus 135. That's going to wrap it up for this episode. We actually got it in under an hour, which shocked me because we had 4 tournaments to go through. But a reminder, by the way, that for the next episode, we were going to do quarter picks. We still might. That's a lot of matches. That's 16 matches. So we might end up breaking it up, actually, depending on the actual calendar. And maybe we might do 2 episodes. Who knows? But we're going to try to come back for the quarters or at least the semis. I guarantee you we'll be back for the semis onward. So we'll see what happens for the quarters. But either way, that is a lot of tennis to break down. So we'll see if we actually have the time to break down 16 matches in one episode. So we'll see. I'll keep an eye on it, but that might be the next episode. Until next time, though, find me on Twitter at Reichel Radio. You can find me on, once again, you can also find me on the NBA show, the MLB show, and the WNBA show. So if you want some basketball picks, we have you covered there. A reminder as well, if you are new to YouTube, welcome. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And also a reminder, if you are new to Spotify or Apple, if you've been around the block for a while and you forgot, don't forget to rate and review. But until next time, good luck to all of you and all of your bets. Bye, everyone.